Welcome, everybody. Happy Wednesday afternoon. I'm in California and it's raining. If you've been listening to the news or anything, you know that we've had a lot of rain here. So it's raining here. Hopefully you guys, I see a little sun out of Steven's window. Maybe it's a
No,
nice day there.
no, it's snowing. So
Oh,
sleeting, sleeting.
well, it looks bright anyway.
All right, well, we'll kick off and people will trickle in. Most of you on here know me. I'm Stephen Bennett, the program's chair. Again, this is gonna be my last year. So welcome. Thank you all for joining. Rusty and I went to high school together a very long time ago. We went to a small school in the Minneapolis suburbs, and he was 2 years older, but as it was a small school, I mean, I graduated with 110. You either knew everyone or knew of everyone. We actually were on the same soccer team, and by that I mean he played varsity and I played JV and freshman. So we hadn't seen each other since he graduated in 1990. And then through the Breck Alumni Network, there was a class, a webinar Rusty hosted about a month or two ago. He can tell you more about that. I found it very interesting, and that led us to today's topic. And I thought it would make for a great program for the CFA Society. So, Rusty.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. Thanks for the introduction. Happy to be with you all here today. So the workshop that I ran with that Stephen mentioned that he was a part of was 90 minutes to clarity to help people really get clear on what their next step is. And we're going to have a little element of that in today's session as well. So for those of you who are I see it looks like a few of you have dialed in, but most of you are probably here. I am going to share some slides so you can check hopefully you can check those out. And I'm going to ask you to chat in some along the way here or there, a couple of things. So hopefully you've got your fingers ready, whether it's on your phone or on the computer, and you can participate, because this is and will be an interactive session, because I want you to come out of here with something that you can apply and take away something that's useful and you can implement right away. All right, so I'm going to share my screen to get us started here. All right, so here we go. Why smart people make bad decisions. So I'm going to start by sharing a couple of stories about some people that I've worked with. So the first person is John. John was one of these hardworking people. He and I worked together for a period of time. He went on and worked for another company. And John was just disciplined. You know, he wanted to get everything done, to stay on top of the details, to be responsive, and he was quite successful. What this meant was getting up early, working, helping, being at work all day. At the end of the day, he would take some time off for dinner with his family, and then he would go back to work in the evenings. Now, even dinner, he told me at one point in our first conversation, even taking time off for dinner, he felt a little guilty because work was still going on. There were meetings, there were emails, there were questions coming in, and he wasn't there on top of it during that time. But he was spending all of his free time, whether it was either with his family or working. And he told me it was to such a degree that he'd not been to the doctor in 5 years because he just didn't have time. That was John. Eric was the kind of person who is super interesting. He's one of these people who blends right brain and left brain kind of thinking. So right brain is the more creative, kind of spontaneous way of thinking. Left brain is a little bit more logical and analytical. Well, Eric loved bringing both of those things, and he was very good at bringing both perspectives. But he also believed when he went to work, he had to show up and button up and be very professional. So when he met with the leaders of his company, he kind of shut down the right brain kind of thing, and he just showed up as buttoned up and professional because he wanted to impress them. He was a little insecure and he wanted to leave a good impression. Then there is Adam. Adam owns his own business and has done pretty well for himself. But what he found was he was spending all of his time working in the business. He was roll up his sleeves, hands on, actually working on things in the business. And he didn't have time to be thinking strategically about the business and what's important. And what he found was because he was so in the details and in the weeds, he was losing his passion, his energy, and his interest. So what's the common thread? We have John working all the time, Eric buttoned up, Adam working in the business and not on the business. And the common thread across all of these things is they're all super smart people, but they were making bad decisions. And I don't say that in a judgmental kind of way. I'm not here to pass judgment on anybody, but by their own admission, what the decisions they were making were not working for them anymore. So what's going on? Why is it that smart people make bad decisions? 3 objectives for our time together here. Number 1, why smart people make bad decisions. But you all know, knowing why something happens doesn't necessarily enable you to change it. So we're also going to talk about how to make better decisions. And we're also then going to apply it. And for you to say, how do you take this to a challenge in your life so you can make a powerful decision and get clear on the next step that you can take to move forward? So that's what we're going to do during our time together today. And we're going to start with a little bit of brain science. Now, this comes from Daniel Kahneman, who wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow, and that's where this work comes from. He also happened to win the Nobel Prize in economics, so he's a smart guy, and he talks about system 1 and system 2 thinking. And this is not just his creation. This is something that is widely accepted and studied by scientists and neurologists around the world. System 1 thinking, if you reference back to the title of his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, system 1 thinking is your fast way of thinking. It's your instinct and your intuition. System 2 thinking is your slow way of thinking. It's your rational, deliberate kind of thinking. How do you describe those? So system 1 is unconscious, fast. It's also associative. You tend to associate things through your system 1 way of thinking. And system 2 is what really differentiates us as human, but it takes effort. It's slower. It is logical, but that part of us tends to be a little bit lazy. It takes way more energy to think using system 2. Let me give you a simple example. If I asked you, what is 2 plus 6? That is a system 1 kind of answer. You've got it at the tip of your fingers, just like that. If I asked you, what is 271 plus 141? That's going to take you a little bit more thinking. And that's going to be a system 2 kind of answer. You can answer that most likely in your head, but it's going to take some time and some energy. Now, the thing is, because it takes energy, your brain is automatically wired to move things from system 2 to system 1. So you don't have to think about it. Consider getting dressed in the morning, driving your car, riding the bicycle, brushing your teeth. Any of these things that happen second nature, you don't have to think about them. Now, here's the real kicker. What percentage of your day-to-day life do you think is governed by system 1, this automatic kind of thinking? So I'm going to ask you now to put this in the chat. So hopefully you guys have a place where you can put in a chat, type in the chat, what percentage of your day-to-day life do you believe is governed by system 1? Take a guess. We're not going to be scoring this or judging it, but I want to hear what you guys think. How much of it is this intuitive, automatic, quick kind of way of processing the world and thinking about things? Got a couple of answers, a 70%, 95, 90, 80, 50. Yeah, most of you guys are all in the right range, because the number that I have seen on this, 95%. Now, that's pretty shocking. Think about that for a moment. 95% of your decisions are this quick, intuitive kind of decision making. And so you have to wonder, what's informing those decisions? Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of a story in a way of illustrating that. So it's we're just the second week of January here. And in my household, we don't really do spring cleaning. We do New Year's cleaning. And the idea is we clean everything up so we can start the new year fresh. We organize the house, and then we get all the soaps and detergents and the brushes and the sponges and all that kind of stuff out, and we go to work. And this isn't just your normal kind of vacuuming, right? This is get down behind the couch. This is clean out the refrigerator, get the soap out and scrub the floor, right? This is real cleaning to start the new year. So we did all that. And then at the end of it, we had a little time off, and I like to play games. So I busted out a game, and I particularly enjoy word games. So I got a simple word game. And one of the questions in this word game was really quite simple. I'm going to ask you guys to help me complete it, which is simply to fill in the missing letter. So tell me, what is the missing letter in this word? Go ahead and put it in the chat. What is the missing letter in this word? Takes a second. Yep, got a few A's. Oh, okay. Well, I've got a few of you who are thinking creatively, because I will tell you, when I speak to different audiences around really around the country, because I do some of this virtually as well as in person, most of the time people answer the way many of you answer, which is A, soap. But I did see a few of you put a U in there, because it could also be soup. Now, if you notice, I primed you to think about soap, because I was talking about cleaning and I was talking about scrubbing and pulling out soaps and detergents and all of that. That is a way that your system one thinking makes associations. I just finished talking about cleaning. I put this up, and the logical answer that many of you, most of you in fact, came up with is an A, soap. Because your environment has a big impact on what you think about. So what does this have to do with how we make decisions? Well, we're primed by the environment that we live in. So for smart, successful people, we have been in an environment that has taught us many simple beliefs. So take a look at this list and think about which of these things resonate with you as things that you believe or you've been told or taught at one point. Success requires hard work. So roll up your sleeves, do everything that's put in front of you, do it well, get it right, don't make any mistakes, and do it the best and fastest and first out of all other people, right? A lot of this comes from our childhood, from our educational experience, that we were trained to be the best, to be the fastest, to get all of the answers right, to follow directions, to do what's expected of you. And then how do you assess that degree of success? Money, of course. That's something very widely accepted across our society, that to be successful means to have a lot of money. And of course, important people are busy. They've got full schedules. Now, you may not subscribe to these beliefs necessarily, but for most of us and most of the smart, successful people that I talk to and ambitious people, there's some element of this that drives how they operate in the world. It certainly was true for in the stories I told you about John and Eric and Adam. John was working all the time, right? Success requires sacrifice. You've got to work hard. Adam had to look good. He had to be presentable. He had to be buttoned up. And then, sorry, that was Eric. And then Adam, of course, had to cover all the bases, no mistakes, make sure everything gets done and gets done well. You can start to think about the way you operate in the world a little bit like the way technology works. I happen to work at Apple. I spent 14 years there at Apple. I was a director of finance there for a number of years. And I was there when the iPhone was launched. And you all know the way the phone works is you have the hardware, then you have an operating system, and you have apps. Now, the reason you have the phone, the reason it's useful to you is the apps, because you want to be able to send messages and take pictures, communicate with people, check the internet, check your mail. All the stuff that you do requires an app. That's the way you interact with the device. But you also know when you put a new app in, the operating system asks you for permission for that app to access all the capabilities of the device, of the phone. So you've gotten those questions like, does this app have permission to access your contacts? Does this app have permission to use the camera? Or even, does this app have permission to track your activity for advertising purposes? We've all been asked those kinds of questions on our phone. And it's the operating system that says yes or no. It's the gatekeeper, if you will. Well, so that's the way technology works. But you can think of the analog as your inner technology, which is the way you work. And you have your hardware, which is you, and you've got amazing capabilities. The question then is, what kind of apps do you want to put in? Well, I want a different job, or I want more clients, or I want to be more successful in my job, or I want more balance in my work life so that I can get to spend more time with my family. These are all different versions of apps that you might want to put in. And you can maybe see where this is going. You also have an operating system that says, well, what do I believe? Do I believe it's possible? Do I believe I could do something like that? And your operating system is the gatekeeper. It determines whether the apps that you want to put in your life will actually be compatible with your life. So I talk about this as your code. And in fact, it's the title of my book, Breaking the Code. It's almost as if you've been programmed. almost as if you've got these assumptions and beliefs about what is and is not possible. And that's your operating system. It's your system one thinking. And it's what determines when you have a desire of something, whether you consider it or you think it's outside of the realm of possibility. So it's that kind of operating system, that system one thinking. It's these limitations that get in your way. So I'll give you a simple example. I just mentioned a moment ago that I worked at Apple. At some point, I knew it was time to move on. I spent 14 years there in total, so I was there for plenty long. I knew it was time to move on. And I remember the day I wrote out my resume and I printed it out and I looked at it and I said, okay, here's my resume. Look at the experience that I've had. Who would hire me? How can I translate that experience to my next job? It's a perfectly reasonable, rational question, but it didn't lead me to any answers that were interesting to me. That's very much operating within the confines of what I believed was possible for me. I spent over 20 years in a corporate environment working at Apple. I worked at General Electric. I have an MBA from Stanford. I invested heavily in this career. But when I asked that question, what experience what next job am I qualified for? Who would hire me based on my experience? I got answers that were not particularly interesting to me. I had to break the code. I had to step outside of that past belief system in order to come up with the idea of, oh, I could be an executive coach, helping people succeed in their career. That was totally outside of the realm of possibility for me, required me to break the code, step outside of the operating system and do that. So this is why smart people make bad decisions. Because we rely on our system one thinking or our operating system, and it's constrained. It's limited of what we think is possible. It's based on our past experience, and we carry that forward, and it can provide a limitation. All right, that may be why, but the next step is how. How do you do something differently than that? So we're going to jump into that now. And I just say, if we're going to go look at making better decisions, let's just not make good decisions. Let's make super decisions. Why not? Let's have a little fun with it. So I am going to give you a simple structure for super decisions. And not surprisingly, perhaps, it has 3 ingredients and they all start with the letter S. The first ingredient is space. In order to make a good decision, you need a little bit of space from the particular situation that you're in. There's a great Medium article that was written by Barack Obama about how he made decisions. And he said, rightfully so, that no easy decisions make it to the level of the president. Only the most difficult decisions land on the president's desk. And he described his way of making decisions, which was very data-oriented, and he gathered all the facts and the information, but then he gave himself some space. He stepped away, he walked away, and he changed gears, if you will. Because what happens when you're involved in a situation is your stress level goes up. And when your stress level goes up, biologically, your field of vision narrows and you see fewer possibilities. Taking some space gives you the opportunity to relax, to lower your stress level, to let your field of view expand again, to see more sense of possibilities. And importantly, it changes your environment. Just like the little soap and soup example I gave you earlier, when you change your environment, you can step away from some of those priming factors that may influence what ideas come to you through this system one thinking. And so create an environment, create a space that is conducive to making a decision. I like to go outside and walk for 10 minutes. That's a very simple way to do this, but even get up, standing up, walking away from your desk, going into another place, even something as simple as that can make a big difference. So that's number 1, S for space. The second key to making a powerful super decision is simplicity. Many of us, when faced with a decision, we confound that decision with all of these different factors. What are other people going to think? Do I think I could do that? What have I done in the past? What do I think is the right decision? How do I get to what's best? One of the people I described earlier, when I described John, Eric, and Adam, as I mentioned, owned a small business, and one of his employees was not delivering the quality of work that he needed. And as a result, Adam was in conversation with that person, was spending more and more of his time fixing and addressing this issue and actually covering for this person. So I had a conversation with Adam and I said, if you take away all of the other factors, how long this person has worked with you, what they would think, how difficult it would be for them, what their personal circumstance is, what other people would think, your discomfort level, if you took all of that away and you just boiled it down to the simple essence of what do you think the right thing to do is? Adam knew almost instantly, this is really not the right role for this person. So either I need to help this person find another role inside the company or outside the company, because what they're doing right now is not working. But it took this deliberate focus of getting to simplicity in order for Adam to get to that point, because otherwise he get mired in all of these other considerations. So that's the second S, is simplicity. The third S is to assume success. So many of us, when we make a decision, focus on all the ways it could go badly. What if this is not the right decision? What if someone else is going to think negatively of me because of this decision? Instead, focus on what if this is a good decision and what are all the good things that can come from it. Most often, we tend to focus on the risk of action as opposed to the risk of inaction, because inaction also has a cost. And so by assuming that you're going to get success and focusing on how this decision can actually move you forward, this can propel you and enable you to make a decision and take action. I'll share with you one of the things that my dad used to say. He would say, I may not always be right, but I'm always certain. I'll tell you honestly, when I was young as a child, that intimidated me. I was like, how can you be certain when you're not even sure you're right? But as I got older, and even just specifically in recent years, I came to appreciate the wisdom in that statement, because it's not about being right. It's about making progress and moving forward and achieving your goals. And so my dad said, I may not always be right, but I'm always certain. And the certainty was certain enough to move forward and take action. So if you assume that this is going to lead to success and you look for all the ways that this decision can be successful, that's going to empower you to take that step and move forward. So give yourself some space, make it simple, and assume that you're going to be successful. Those are 3 simple ways to how to make a better decision. All right. So now we're going to go to the next step, which is how do you apply this? So I'm going to ask you to think about a challenge that you have in your life. Bring something to mind right now. And by the way, get a pen and a paper or something on the computer, someplace where you can take notes. Get that ready, because we're gonna need that in a few minutes. But think about a challenge that you're facing. So this could be a challenge that you're facing at work, how to manage a difficult employee, how to keep your team energized and motivated. This could be something more personally related to your career and the right work environment for you, the kind of work that you're doing. It could be you feel like you're stuck or you've plateaued in your work and you want to get to the next level. It could also be something that's personal. It's going to be something more around work-life balance or something that's personal, whether that's a health thing or a relationship thing. But think of a specific challenge that you've got in your life that you would like to resolve in some way. Now, as you think about that, I'm going to tell you that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of questions you ask. And the example I gave you about my resume, looking at my resume and saying, who would hire me based on this experience? That's a perfect example, because my brain went to work saying, who would hire me based on this experience? What other kinds of jobs could I find by leveraging what I've done in the past? But the job that I ultimately settled on did not come from leveraging my past experience. It came from going in a different direction. And it's been a wonderful journey, and I love it. But did you have to ask the right question? And honestly, most of us ask the wrong question. Most of us ask, what do I think I can have? What's possible? What's reasonable? Those are fine questions, but it's a much more empowering kind of approach to ask, what do you really want? What would feel really good to you? What would be energizing to you? I mentioned I worked at Apple when the phone was introduced, and they followed a similar kind of approach, because you all know there were smartphones before the iPhone. And they had little keyboards like the BlackBerry. Often they had a stylus, a little pen kind of thing that you could tap on the screen with. but there was no touch sensitive screen like the iPhone that allowed you to interact with it just with your fingers. If Apple had asked the question, what is possible for us? What do I think we can achieve? They may have gone with the physical keyboard or the stylus, but they didn't do that. Steve Jobs' approach was always, what is it that we want? And let's go off and build that. So he went in the direction of saying, hey, what I believe is we don't need a keyboard and we don't need a stylus. We want the whole screen real estate available for interaction, and you'll use your fingers to interact with it. And then they went off and they built that capability. Now, some people might say, that's great for technology, but how does that apply individually? And I want to share with you this quote from George Bernard Shaw. He says, the reasonable person adapts themselves to the world. The unreasonable one persists to adapt the world to themselves. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable person. So as you bring this challenge to mind, I invite you to think about, what does unreasonable success look like? Now let's bring the 3 S's to bear in here and make sure that you don't fall in the trap of thinking based on your past experience. So number 1, space. Hopefully you already have some space. You're able to be present with this question and this challenge. And I've given you some different ways of thinking about things. Number 2, simplicity. Keep it simple. Don't worry what other people will think. Don't worry if it's reasonable. Don't worry if you've done it before, but trust yourself. Trust your gut, almost like you're in a restaurant ordering off the menu. You don't use your rational brain to analyze the nutritional contents of each item on the menu to make a decision. You use your gut. You say, what am I hungry for? What do I want? Use that kind of thinking here to make a decision. And third is success. Assume that you can achieve what it is that you want. Your focus in answering this question, what does unreasonable success look like, is what does unreasonable success look like? Your focus is on what, not how do I get there, not if can I get there, but your focus is on what. What does an unreasonable degree of success look like in this particular challenge area that you've identified? So I'm going to give you a minute, just a few minutes to write some notes on that. So go ahead and take about a minute right now to write for yourself, what does unreasonable success look like? All right, so hopefully you've got some notes now. So go ahead and put your pen down, and I'm going to invite you now to do a little experiment. The experiment is this. Imagine yourself at the end of this year. Rather than January of 2023, imagine instead that it's December of 2023. And you're approaching the end of the year, you're approaching New Year's, and you're reflecting on the year. And everything that you just wrote about this challenge, you have accomplished. Just put yourself, and if you'd like, you can close your eyes and just picture yourself with a spouse or a loved one or with friends, celebrating the year, reflecting on 2023 and how good you feel about this accomplishment, having achieved this degree of unreasonable success. You might feel joyful. You might feel some sense of joy and gratitude for for what you've accomplished in the year. Perhaps you feel proud of the effort that you put in and having achieved this. You might even feel a greater degree of confidence because of what you have achieved and how you are approaching the world now, having achieved this wonderful success. Maybe there's other words that come to your mind, but just articulate and connect with, how does it feel for you to be this successful? As you think about that, jot down some notes. Just write down a couple of words. What does it feel like to be that successful? Because what we just did in that exercise is to reprogram a little bit of your code, a little bit of your operating system. So many of us tend to look at a challenge that's in front of us, and we look at the gap and we say, well, yeah, where I'd love to be is this, but I'm here, and here's all the problems that I can see and going from here to there. And we tend to focus on what's missing and all the problems and all the challenges. And that is one way of looking at the world. But by stepping to the other side of that and to focus on what does it feel like to be successful, you have reprogrammed your operating system. You have put in a new sense of possibility, because that person can achieve these things. And I will tell you, you can absolutely achieve what you have written down as unreasonable success. And I know that because, having spoken to hundreds of people and done this work with hundreds of people, I know that you can achieve it. I have seen dozens and dozens of people do it, and I know that you can too. And by putting yourself in December of 2023 and imagining how does it feel, you're starting to build some of that internal belief. Doesn't matter, don't worry about the how, but just the internal belief that you can achieve it. And that will be a very powerful part of your operating system as you move forward. So if you believe that, if you step into that place where you believe that I can absolutely achieve this, I want to ask you, what is a step that you can take? What is a step you can take right now with what you have from where you are in order to move in that direction? So I invite you, just go ahead, write down a little note, put on in your notebook, or if you're typing, that's fine. But to put down a note there about what is a step that you can take to move you towards this goal, this picture of unreasonable success. I'll give you just a second to think about that and to write down an action step. Okay, now the next question I want to ask you is this: by when will you take that action step? Now, for most people, this is when you start to squirm a little bit. They say, hey, well, this has been a nice exercise, and I have some ideas, but you actually want me to make a commitment to do this and to make a date commitment about when I'm going to do it? And the answer is yes, I do. I want you to make a commitment to yourself to put this into practice. We've just practiced these 3 S's of giving yourself space, making a simple decision, and assuming success. And I want you to actually follow through on that, because it's in the action that you actually learn this, that you put it into practice and you bring a decision from a concept into reality. So yes, I want you to put a date on there. Go ahead and write that down, a date by when you are going to take this decision, take this action. All right. Now, I've got this. We actually went through this material pretty quickly, and so I want to do just share with you, kind of as we summarize this. I want to share a couple of things. Number one is, we talked about 3 things. We talked about why smart people make bad decisions, how to make better decisions with the 3 S's, and my hope is that you got some clarity on your next step. Now, I want to just share with you guys in the chat a couple of ways that you can contact me. One is my email, and then the second is a calendar link, because I know some people want to say, yeah, this is great, but I actually want to dive deeper into how to apply this for me. I would be happy to do that with you. So I want to offer, if that's of use to you, go ahead and schedule a time. You know how to reach me with this contact information. But I also want to circle back to the 3 people that we talked about, because we talked about John, we talked about Eric, we talked about Adam, and how did they apply this idea of space, simplicity, and success to move forward. So I described John earlier. John was working all the time, hadn't been to the doctor in 5 years, felt guilty taking time off of work to go have dinner with his family. He did it, but he's just, part of him didn't feel good about it. And then he went back and worked for the rest of the night. And that's what his life looked like. So one of the things that John had a desire to do is he had a desire to work with some friends to make an impact in the world. And he actually, he met with his friends a few times and they brainstormed some ideas. And so he had some ideas, but he said, we're not making the kind of progress I want to make. So I asked him, what's in your way? And he said simply, time. I just don't have the time that I need to put in to make a difference. And so I asked him, how much time do you need? He said, 5 hours a week. I said, okay, well, if you want 5 hours a week, where's that going to come from? You don't really have personal time. So it's either going to come from family time or work time. Which one of those? He said, well, I'm not going to give up family, so it's got to come from work. Imagine getting 5 hours a week out of your work calendar. That's a pretty significant challenge, isn't it? Well, we didn't go all at once, so we did a little experiment. We took a little bit of time out of his calendar in order for him to devote that time towards this project and see how it went. We did an experiment. That went pretty well. So we took the next step and the next step, and pretty soon, John had taken 5 hours a week out of his work calendar to work on this side project. Now, there are 3 things that he learned in doing this. Number one is he could take that time out of work and work on the side project, and there wasn't really much impact to his work. That was interesting. So the second thing he learned is that by taking time away from work, working on this side project, and then ultimately doing other things, he was more energized, he was more engaged, and he made better decisions at work. He actually went on to start playing golf more regularly, spending even a little bit more time with his family. And all this was taking away from his work, but it highlighted the third thing, which is as he was making better decisions at work, as he was more effective, as he was more focused, he had a different perspective. He was performing at a whole new higher level at work. And because he was performing at a higher level, he got new opportunities and new responsibilities, and he was promoted. So think about that for just a moment. How many people do you know who spent less time at work and got promoted as a result? And it's not just about the time, right? There's much more to this. It's about how you make decisions, about how you show up. It's about the perspective that you bring and the impact that you bring during the time that you are working. And I think this is such a great story about John, because we then later on, after this time that we had met together, we met on a Friday afternoon. And we met for coffee to catch up and see, so he could fill me in on what he had been doing in the time since we had last worked together. And we scheduled to meet at 3 o'clock, and I showed up at 3 o'clock and he wasn't there. The first thought that went to my mind was, oh, he must be at work. He must be delayed. And then a couple minutes later, John shows up and he walks out of a bookstore. And he comes up to me and he said, oh, well, you see, Rusty, I've joined a book club at work, and I wanted to stop by the bookstore to pick up the latest book that we're reading. And I was so tickled by this whole experience. One, that he was in the bookstore and had joined a book club, and that's where he was, rather than that's why he was delayed. But second of all, to reveal my own assumption about him and to recognize, oh, here I am assuming that he's at work, but he's not at all. He's out in the world enjoying his life. And so that's what it can look like to make super decisions. That was John's example. Eric's example, you remember, he was this very interesting combination of right brain kind of creative, philosophical thinking, and left brain analytical, rigorous, logical kind of thinking. And when he was with the executives or with important people, he thought he needed to impress them. He only showed up with the left brain kind of thinking. Well, Eric made a decision to wade into a different way of doing things. And he started to say, well, okay, maybe I can show up a little bit differently. So in some of those executive meetings, he started asking the questions that he had in mind. People were debating A versus B, and he would come in and say, it doesn't have to be A or B, it could be X or it could be Y. Or he would ask a question that was a little bit off the wall, but it came at things from a different angle because that's the way he thought. He was worried this was going to be looked down upon, but it was quite the opposite. Very quickly after doing this a few times, people started to approach Eric. And they said, Eric, we want you to come to this meeting, because they recognized him as a strategic thinker. They recognized him for being himself and bringing the best of himself, and they wanted more of that. And I think this is such a great example, because by being himself, rather than being who he thought he needed to be, he started showing up more and more as himself, making a better decision in that way, and having a much bigger impact on the organization as a result. And of course, happier doing so. And then there was Adam. Adam, who was stuck working in the business rather than on the business. He did ultimately change the role of this person who was not working well on the team. But beyond that, he started to look at all the areas that were consuming his time and attention and say, how can those be addressed? Whether, does he have the right people? He did make a few strategic hires. Does he need to change a process? Does he need to delegate something that he's been doing himself? And by looking at all of those different opportunities and making an appropriate decision for each one, he was able to pull back from the day-to-day business operations and instead work on the business instead of in the business. And by working on the business, he started a new venture. And he was able to invest more of his time and energy building relationships and being out in the community, which was really his strong suit. He worked in his zone of genius rather than doing the day-to-day work, and was able to grow the business. All of these are the ingredients to making super decisions and the results that you can get when you do so. Because when we tend to go back to looking at the resume, to saying, what am I qualified to do? That's using that as an analogy for the way we approach most of our decisions, leveraging our code, using our operating system, making decisions the same way we've always done them. We get more of the same results. It takes making super decisions with some space, with some simplicity and some success that enables you to move forward. And you have it all inside of you. So I hope that you've taken something from this. And I want to just give an opportunity for Q&A, because we did wrap up a little bit earlier than I expected to. If you've got any questions, I want to just go ahead and take yourself off mute. If you'd like to turn your camera on, it's always nice to put a face to a name, not necessary, but take yourself off mute and go ahead and ask a question if anything has come up for you. I'm going to tolerate a little bit of awkward silence here for a moment in case anybody's trying to figure out their turn in line or figure out how to get unmuted. But go ahead and ask if you've got a question. All right, it is quiet. Well, I've got one more thing that I want to share with you here. I'm going to put this also in the chat. You've got my email and a link to set up time with me if you'd like to dig in further. I've also just put a link in there to a weekly email that I send out. It's very simple. It's once a week. It's short and sweet. It's entertaining, and it's focused on leadership principles, tools and ideas that you can apply in your career, in your job, and more broadly in your life. I get a lot of positive feedback from my readers, so you're welcome to click on that link and get yourself on the list. You'll get every Monday morning, you will get an email with some inspiration to start your week on a slightly different note, to think about things differently. Okay, I'm going to stay here on the line. So we are going to wrap up the formal part of this. If anybody has any questions, if you'd like to stay on and chat, I will be here. So feel free to stick around and join me in that conversation. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. It's been nice to meet you all. And I hope that we'll be in touch.